I can.
Dial in.
Yep, no
Okay,
problem.
good.
We're good to go.
All right. So hi, everyone, and welcome to our October session of Agile Rhode Island. Today we have Dan Gallagher and Sean Fitzgibbons from Slalom Consulting, and they're going to talk about stop building the wrong things faster, reversing the course of Agile. Dan Gallagher is driven by the notion that life is too short to build products that people don't want. He has 30 years as product designer, product manager, product owner, and several other titles, even been a Scrum Master. He's combined his experience with extensive product research, wisdom from the pundits, and life observations to evolve the product agility methodology into a powerful force for change in product development. And with him, he's got Sean Fitzgibbons, and Sean is a consultant with delivery leadership at Slalom Consulting. So thank you very much for joining us, Dan and Sean, and presenting for us.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for taking the time to, out of a probably a busy week, as I know most of you are having. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so well, thank you for that introduction. I'm trying to think of what else I could add to that, but Sean, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So Sean Fitzgibbons with delivery leadership at Slalom. Been working in delivery for the past 15 years as a project master, ultimately as a Scrum Master, so focus more on the delivery side than the product side. But for the last year at Slalom, been working with Dan on product agility and having this concept roll out to clients for different industries. So excited to be here.
Yeah, and Sean kind of undersells it. He's a powerful asset to Slalom in building this effort out. So I'm going to tell a little bit about myself, but while I do, we're hoping to get a little bit more understanding of the audience. So Sean, do you want to explain this? Sean, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, my audio dropped out there. So okay. Yeah, if everybody could go to menti.com, we will pull up the survey results as they come in.
So yeah, we're just going to ask you a quick question about what concerns you the most with product development and product delivery right now. And while you do that, in my bio, it said I've been doing this for about 30 years. What happened and what set me on this path, I was at a company called Network World, which is part of IDG, Computer World, Macworld. You may have heard of some of these brands. In around 2003, 2004, I came across the Agile Manifesto and read it. Now, I'd been a product designer and a product manager at the time. And I was fascinated by this concept of inspecting and adapting and not sitting down and writing massive specs and throwing them over the wall and hoping what we thought was going to be built was going to be built. So I tried to get the development team at Network World to kind of embrace what Agile was, and it went absolutely nowhere. It was kind of a new concept. It was very radical. But what I did decide to do was I was going to start testing the theories behind it from what I could control. Now, I was the business owner and designer of the website. So one day I noticed that we were having a lot of traffic that flowed to whenever a writer would write about how to buy a server, how to buy a router, what to look for when you're buying a new network attached storage, which was big at the time. A lot of traffic flowed to those. So it pointed to the fact that people were using the site to buy. So I wanted to build out buyer's guides. And when I tried to get the approval to do that, I was told no, because the business model was to build ancillary microsites for people like Cisco and other major IT providers. And that would, if we built buyer's guides, it would piss them off and eat into that revenue. So what I ended up doing was I just, in the nav bar, asked the question, are you looking to buy a server, a router, NAS, and then it linked it to a cluster of articles about that topic. And what happened was traffic really flowed to those areas heavily. And we ended up getting so much traffic, we designed it some more and designed it some more. And eventually companies like Cisco noticed it and weren't upset. They weren't looking to pull revenue away. They were actually looking to give us revenue to get sponsors in that area. And those buyer's guides, after multiple iterations, became the most powerful, most profitable part of the website and carried the company for years to come. So it was really an early MVP that we did. No one was calling it that at the time, but we learned a lot. And we just basically started doing that from about 2004 for the next 4 years. In 2008, Network World was awarded the best media website by MyTex, a New England-based organization. And it was really, to me, based on the fact that we were doing this product discovery, we're inspecting, adapting, in complete alignment with the idea that we don't know what to build, but we're going to figure it out. So anyway, Sean, how are we looking at the results of this?
Good. So we've got about 12 responses in, kind of talk through. But Dan, you pull out the ones that speak the most to you. I think a lot of these sound familiar, but delivering the wrong thing, not enough people involved, pressure to deliver what the client wants and on time, but not enough of commitment to the quality of the end product, not prioritizing the work, too much control by the business without appropriate research, setting too ambitious of a goal for MVP to beta, not being able to deliver incrementally to gather feedback along the way, incomplete requirements and product owners who don't manage scope, servant leadership, having clear demand signal of what's needed, trying to get full DevOps workflow, including monitoring in production and getting customer feedback into product updates, lack of communication around what the full problem is, business is pushy about the direction to go, then changes their mind, empowering the teams, don't have a clear model for product development workflow, too many priorities.
Excellent. Okay, I think that's a great list, and I think we're going to be touching, so feel free to bring your questions up as we go through, because I think we're going to touch on a fair amount of what was thrown out there. So actually, it's not officially any kind of business gathering unless there's a Peter Drucker quote, right? But management is doing things right.
Dan,
leadership is doing. Yeah.
I think you have to take the control back. I think we're still seeing my screen.
Oh, I didn't realize you'd taken it. Hold on 1 second.
Hey, Dan, would you mind just muting for a quick second? I'm hearing some feedback, and I just want to see if it's you or if it's just the internet. Ah, okay, it was you. Okay, there's a little static in the background. I don't know if you have anything running near your speaker or anything.
I do not. Is it problem? I mean, I could try headphones if it's.
I can hear you. Okay, I can
Right,
just hear the static.
Okay. If it builds, I'll mute periodically. Okay.
Great. All right. Thanks.
Okay. So, the reality today. In 2019, there were $457 billion spent on IT software development. That's just last year. There's multiple studies, and Jeff Patton mentioned this in his book about user story mapping, that it's 64% of software products and features are rarely or never used. Now, if you put seldom, add to that category, it's over 80%, which is, in my personal experience, very accurate. Why is 80% of what's built seldom, rarely, or never used? So if you look at it from that perspective, that was $274 billion. That's over $250 billion spent on software that just was never worth building. That's tremendous waste. And we spent a lot of time looking at why that is. And to explain it, we try to look at it from the idea of a basic value stream, right? The way the world tends to work. Someone has an idea, there's vision, there's a plan, there's some kind of design, something is delivered, it's deployed, there's hopefully some kind of validation, a launch, and then voila, there's a benefit to the user. Now, Agile in its infinite wisdom, really focuses on delivery, right? It's really focused in on how do we inspect and adapt, but it tends to be, tell us what you want to build. Okay, now we're going to create this really dynamic process around delivery, and then we're going to throw it back over into deployment. It doesn't take into account the entire value stream. What we want to talk about is the entire value stream, and really looking at it from the degree of, the vision to launching, the planning to validation, the design to deployment, and how the agile mentality, the whole cycle, can be broadened through that. The other thing we want to talk a little bit about is it tends to be a focus on the idea, right? I have an idea, let's get it going. And a lot of times someone mentioned research, and when Sean talked about it, there's research done that says it's a great idea. We're going to talk about this. A lot of times learning doesn't really begin till something is built, and something will define further. But when you think about it, it's the benefit that really matters, right? So how do you drive the benefit first and have that evolve the idea? Kind of invert the whole idea. As someone once said, you might build a castle from the ground up, but you build an MVP from the sky downward. Start with the end result and work backwards from there. Another way to think about it is solve a problem, don't build a solution. And that's going to come up a lot tonight. There's a big difference in the mentality when you're building a solution versus when you're solving a problem. When you're building a solution, you tend to have your head down and you're trying to get something done, assuming that what you're doing is going to, quote unquote, solve the problem. But that's the flow. What we want to do is have our head up, looking around. Everything we do has a cause and has a reaction in the market. Are we solving the problem? Are we stepping closer to solving the problem? Are we stepping closer to bringing about the outcome our users need? So what is product agility? Some of you may be familiar with Hendrik Nyberg. He's a kind of a product ownership pundit, agile pundit, fairly well known, really smart guy. Around 2012-ish, he did a video of product ownership. He does those videos, if you haven't seen it, great videos, by the way, of explaining product ownership, and he's drawing as he's narrating, and he's got this great hokey style. And in that video, he scribbled, one of those videos, the one about product ownership, he scribbled this Venn diagram up in the corner and just kind of said, build the right thing, build the thing right, build the thing fast, find the balance. And then he kind of moved on. And I really embraced that back in 2012 and started trying to use it. But I ran into problems because as you look to try to balance these things, they're not physical based. You can't just take from one and give to another to make them balanced. If you build the right thing and build the thing fast, well, you build the right thing, you have to slow down. Actually, no. A faster feedback loop can actually enhance your ability to build the right thing. So what I came to realize, it's not about balance. So I just kind of stripped away that Venn diagram and started thinking about it differently, right? Agile delivery. Agile delivery is really about build the thing fast and build the thing right. And I talked about the Agile Manifesto, and I know it talks about, it's agile is to bring value to the market and everything like that, and that encompasses building the right thing. Agile transformations that I've ever seen, been a part of, observed, have always focused on build the thing fast, build the thing right. Some would argue they only focus on building it fast, but it's really about Agile's role today tends to be build the thing right, build the thing fast. When you think about build the thing fast and build the right thing, that's something what we call continuous discovery. Are you continuously experimenting and discovering what is working and feeding that back into the validation, right? So we're discovering what works, build the thing fast, build the right thing, build the thing right, build the right thing. Then we're build the right thing, build the thing right, we're validating it. And this cycle, then it feeds back into agile delivery. So this cycle becomes a powerful way to start rethinking the way you do product. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. This is the essence of it. So if I kind of look at this cycle, think about it, the story I told earlier, we put some links in the nav bar. We built out some pages with clustered articles. and we saw that people liked it. We got a lot of traffic. We did a few more enhancements, another turn of the cycle, and we got even a better response. As we step out from the center of the circle, we're taking more resources and we're taking more risk, but because we're validating at each step, the risk is mitigated. So after the third or fourth turn of the cycle, revenue got involved. And then it was really a situation where we were just, we had a tiger by the tail. We just kept iterating on it, trying what worked, what didn't work, and evolving outward. And soon we had a full-blown product that was highly, highly profitable. And we had very little risk. If we'd started at the outer circle spec and wrote it all up, we would have missed the mark. We never would have built what we ended up building. We built it from the idea of validating everything, each turn of the cycle, each step of the way. But to do this, a cycle, what grinds cycles to a halt, any business cycle, is friction, is things not working. And what we really coach, what Sean and I are coaching at multiple clients right now, is how to establish this cycle and then remove the friction. Now, back to this diagram that we started with. There's friction in this cycle that's gonna be very hard to overcome. And the way we do that is 3 key steps. In the outer piece, we become outcomes driven. So we coach, and we'll get into this, but we coach teams on how not to focus on the output that they're told to build, but focus on the outcome that they need, the business needs, the user needs. That's got to be the focus. You're not building a solution or an output. You're solving a problem or producing an outcome in the market. Important thing to note, users aren't using a product because they want to use a product. Users are using the product because they actually want the value it produces, or they think it's going to produce. That's a key distinction, right? So let's focus on why they're really using the product. Is it because of the product? It's the benefit or the outcome at the end of the day that they're going to get from it. The second piece we call embrace uncertainty. And what that really is about is if we all agree on the outcomes that we're trying to deliver, leadership down to the team level, and we can create alignment. And that alignment is really critical. And some of you might have mentioned something. It's hard to be aligned. It's impossible to align on outputs. Outcomes are much more of something people can get behind. Now, as you take the next step level, how do we produce that outcome? That's where the difference of opinions start to flow in, right? That's where we start to, we push this idea of embracing uncertainty. The idea that we're aligned on the outcome, we don't know how to get there. So we're going to iterate towards it. And we're going to talk a lot about that. That's probably the biggest piece we'll talk about tonight. And then aligned autonomy. And this is something that we really, frankly, borrowed from Spotify. It's the idea of we align around outcomes. We enable autonomy throughout the process so that people can deliver through iterations, through this embrace uncertainty. And we reinforce aligned autonomy at the end through leadership, through incentives, through things like that. So it's really the 3 key areas to make that cycle happen, is to remove the friction by focusing on outcomes, embracing uncertainty, and aligned autonomy. So let me kind of step through each one of these in a little more detail. So outcomes driven. So to tell people where to go and not how to get there, you'd be amazed at the results. And I think this is really, really important for leadership to understand. So often leaders, they know what they need. They know the outcome that they're being held accountable, what the user needs, but then they feel like I need to jump down and tell them how to do it. And the bottom line is they don't know. They believe they know. People on the team believe they know. Stakeholders always know exactly how to do it. But actually, it's usually not true. They may be directionally correct, but there's a big difference between almost right and spot on right when you're building a product. So first of all, what is an outcome? I spent some time at Forrester and I really liked it there, so I used their definition. But this definition was generated after I'd left, and it's really resonated with me. So an outcome, an achieved end state that can be verified through measurable results. So that's key. It's measurable. It's important, right? It's tied to top-level funded initiatives. So it matters. it's defined through the lens of the people who are accountable for the end state. So the team, everyone who's involved in making it real, has a say in how they define how the outcome becomes defined. It's colored or it's influenced by the interests of the stakeholders. And it's reached over time. Important point. It's reached over time. It isn't a point A to point B journey. So that's key. I mean, release 7.3 isn't an outcome. Release 7.3 is supposed to hopefully produce a series of outcomes that the business and the user needs. It's more important to focus on those outcomes that the business and user needs than it is on release 7.3, because no one's quite sure if it's going to work to do that. There are 3 types of outcomes, right? So there's outcomes of value creation, higher, and those are, you'll know when you're doing that when you have high increased retention rates, higher acquisition rates, customer loyalty, and so on. There's outcomes of value capture. And these two are intrinsically linked. It's almost like a yin and yang, right? If you're creating a lot of value, there's more that you can capture. And that's captured via increased revenue, profitability, upsell opportunities, that type of thing. And then there's outcomes of efficiency. How do you do those other 2 things in a more cost-effective and efficient way? It's critical to focus on value creation wherever and whenever possible, because the more you focus on value creation, the easier value capture becomes, significantly easier. So many of our clients zero in on, we need more revenue. How can we squeeze more out of what we have existing, rather than go back and focus on, let's create more value so we'll be able to capture more. So take a breath here. Are there any questions before we jump in? We go further? Okay, so it's important that outcomes aren't just dictated from on high. They really need to be, yes, they're initiated through leadership, but they should more be developed through a dialogue throughout the organization. The next point is really key, and we're going to talk a lot more about this as well, that it's going to be understood that the pathway to make an outcome real is riddled with assumptions. To begin anything, you need to start with an assumption, and that's fine. You need to do it. The problem becomes when you make an assumption, you go with it, and it's wrong, or that can be a fatal mistake. The outcome also, I talked before about focusing on solving a problem, not building a solution. The important thing there is that an outcome is all about solving a problem. To make an outcome happen, you need to solve a problem. You can't really build a solution, put your head down and build a solution and expect an outcome. And teams will learn that over time. And the other thing, and this is, I think, mentioned in the comments, that there's a lot of shifting priorities and things like that. The viability of any feature may shift. Opinions are going to shift. Stakeholders think this versus that versus this. An outcome, although they do change, they tend to hold steadier. Most often, if they're done properly, outcomes are derived properly. They really don't change that often. So just to give an actual example, this is actually a client that Sean and I worked on recently. There's a healthcare client. And we worked with them, so they had a series of multi-year themes, right? And one of those themes was clinical practice, enabling better clinical outcomes. So that was an overall theme that they wanted to drive through their entire product line. One of the products had an annual outcome of achieving higher market penetration in the U.S. market by 27+%. Higher revenue growth. So that was how they were going to, that's one of the outcomes they needed to do. To do that, the sub-outcome was increased customer satisfaction. And then we get into more the development level, the epics and the stories. What's important to point out here is that at the epic level, the way these are constructed is that the first part of the epic, what happens before the so that statement, is an output, right? What we're saying is, as a product administrator, we want the ability to sync the hospital systems with product X. Now, there's a lot of assumptions that will do something. So that, and the so that is where the sub outcome that's supposed to drive the outcome above it exists. So the burden of managing users in 2 systems is reduced, and the delay in recycling the unused license is reduced, saving time and simplifying and streamlining the process. So the bet is that sub outcome will drive increased customer satisfaction, which will then drive higher revenue growth, which will then drive better clinical outcomes. down to the story level. Again, what's the output? And then after that, that a user account can quickly be reassigned to a new user. That's the sub outcome, right? That will drive the next outcome, will drive that. It's like a pyramid. What's key here is that this structure creates transparency and visibility into what the business is trying to do at all levels. So it enables the team to understand that the outcome they're trying to produce with this story is that it's much quicker to reassign a new user. That's the outcome that the business is betting on. I should say the sub outcome. Not English we use, but that's really what it is. What I found, being from the product side, is the more you involve developers and make them understand what you're actually trying to do, they have great ideas, and they have ideas, product side never would have thought of. So creating this transparency is a really powerful thing. It's something that we do extensively when we work with clients. Another key thing to point out, that there are leading indicators that measure outputs, right? Outputs aren't a bad thing. You're outputting something, but an output's value is really measured by how well it drives the outcome. Outcomes are measured by lagging indicators, right? So leading indicators tend to be things like usage. People are clicking on it. We were doing a good job. Absolutely, that's a good indication. But do you have a well-defined outcome you want from the user, and are you measuring that? Because that will tell you, via a lagging indicator, if you're actually making progress towards the outcome. Are you making that difference in the market that you set out to do? That's best for your business, that's best for your customers. So it's an important distinction. And we actually, I think we'll talk a little bit more about those as well. So actually, here's a real example that we worked on. So measuring a tool designed to help doctors better target therapeutic drug treatments to specific patients, so that if Sean and I both saw the same doctor for the same condition, we would get different, based on the algorithms we were working with, different drug treatments. So a leading indicator we had was high usage of the tool, and not long usage, but short repeat visits, because it meant like they were in and out quickly, getting what they needed and off. The lagging indicator, however, was a decrease in the reported number of drug side effects, drug interactions, and mistreatments reported by the institution when this tool was used. Now, it turns out the lagging indicator, we had no impact in the first couple of iterations, which we had the leading indicator, there's a lot of traffic. People liked it. We followed through with the lagging indicators and realized we weren't having the outcomes we had hoped. However, we were able to change things on the algorithms and understand them better, so that over time the lagging indicators began to rise, and it became a very powerful tool. I'm going to take a break. Sean, do you want to talk about compliance and regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll give Dan a breather here for a second. Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know if that's me. All right. So regulatory and compliance in agile product discovery and delivery. This comes up very often with most of the clients we deal with. Compliance internal or regulations external that they're dealing with potentially is threatening to hamper agility, send them back to more of a waterfall mindset. Some of the strategies we've seen work effectively in these environments, viewing compliance and regulations as stakeholders to your outcomes. So taking those into account as you build out the backlog. Adding regulatory requirements to your product backlog and definition of done. So certain clients on a per sprint basis for definition of done, they're able to get through some of the regulatory items they need to. Not everybody can do that quickly, but when possible, we have them added to the definition of done, but also addressing them as part of the product backlog is something we've seen work. Consider compliance testing and continuous discovery, build it into continuous delivery, and automate it where possible. So again, kind of not going to some rushed QA at the end just prior to a large waterfall release, but doing that ongoing compliance testing where possible. And if it's not feasible to validate compliance on a per sprint basis, then establish stabilization sprints. I'm sure a lot of people here have done that in many different ways. And the last item, focus sprint increments on usable and potentially releasable code, but only release when compliant. So the focus still is on production ready code, at the end of each increment. However, once all those compliance and regulatory items are tied up, that's when you release. Very few clients we deal with have the ability, just from a logistics standpoint, to be able to release on a 2-week basis based on the types of regulations they're dealing with in risk-averse environments. So there's a lot there, and I think a lot of that stuff ties into your specific situation, and different clients we've seen handle this in different ways. But the message really is that this can still be done in environments that are heavily regulated and lots of internal compliance, and we've helped that happen.
Thanks, Sean. Another piece we'll talk about a little while, but I'll highlight it here, is that low fidelity paper prototyping and things like that, that obviously don't require any regulation. You know, the more you can learn up front before you bump up against the regulatory wall, is a powerful way to think about things in a continuous discovery environment.
Yeah. More important, right, in regulatory and compliance environments where you can't get things out every 2 weeks, that you have ways to get that low fidelity validation. That's a great point.
So an example, one thing we also get is roadmap. And roadmaps are important. I mean, they've been part of product development since I can remember. And the problem with them tends to be is that they're all about outputs. You know, we're in Q4, depending on your cycle, your fiscal year cycle. For me to say we're going to deliver feature A, B, and C in Q3 of next year, I'm not sure what the value is, because we don't know. It's going to be a different world. We're going to learn a lot between now and then. So to commit to having that is a difficult scenario. So what we really look at is a different perspective, which is really an outcomes-based roadmap, which we'll talk about here. So a company we worked with, same company I'd referenced earlier. There was a series of strategic themes that spanned a couple years, and one of them we had talked about actually is increase the clinical effectiveness of product X. You know, and then here are the main initiatives beneath that. These are the areas that they wanted to get better at. So if we look at that, one of those initiatives, which is select a drug, this is the here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the acceptance criteria. There's the value or the sub outcome that we talked about. Then the leading indicator and the lagging indicator. So it's kind of a breakdown of what we're looking at. And the question becomes, you know, how does that look as a roadmap? And the roadmap really looked at it from the perspective of, in each of these main initiatives, what outcomes were we looking to produce when? So Q2, integration of the drug side effect relationships and ID complications, empowering providers to better understand the side effects of drugs. So that's really what we're looking to do. Because it's Q2 of 20-something, we're going to learn a lot between now and then, because it's going to be iterative. So we don't know how to do that, but we do know what we're trying to do, which is better understand the side effects of drugs, enable users to better understand the side effects of drugs. We're going to iterate towards it. We're going to produce that outcome somehow. We're just not sure yet. And because we're in a 2-week cycle, leadership will have 2-week check-ins to make sure that, to keep us honest, to make sure that we're always driving towards that outcome, or we're pausing or pivoting or proceeding, whatever we need to do. It's a much different way to think, and it's this big departure of the way the world works today, but it's much more powerful if you can transition to it. Okay, so we talked about outcomes driven, and if it's being done properly, there's alignment automatically throughout the organization. It's not complete alignment. You know, no organization is perfect, but it's much better, especially if you can go to at every level of the team, leadership, mid-management, and they know what outcomes they're trying to produce. If it's communicated at that level, it can be very, very powerful around alignment. So then it's about embrace uncertainty. Everyone understands we don't know how to create this outcomes. So how do we embrace uncertainty? And this is actually a quote from Scott Cook, but it's from the Lean Startup, Eric Ries's book, which is a good read if you haven't read it. But leadership really means, you know, the platform for experimentation, the support of experimentation, and driving that throughout the organization. That's a really powerful takeaway. You know, and uncertainty in every situation when we walk into, there's a lot of uncertainty. Sometimes people are oblivious to it. You know, they just assume that the product team knows what to do and they're going to go do it. Some deny that there is any uncertainty. There's we have environments where people ignore it. At a lot of places more recently, there's acknowledgement of uncertainty. That's a lot of reasons why we're over there, but they don't know what to do with it. Then there's different modes of addressing an uncertainty. And then what we want to talk about is embracing it, is using it as an asset as opposed to something that's going to create uncertainty and drag you down. It's really about assumptions. I'd mentioned assumptions earlier, but we're really going to drill into assumptions because it's amazing once you start to talk and think about assumptions, how many assumptions there really are there that people are just assuming are true. So what is our assumption? So like I said, it's something believed to be true without any direct evidence. Just even today, talking to clients and the evidence they say, oh, well, our users want it. That's the evidence. Not really. If users knew what they wanted, then we wouldn't have the iPhone, right? If we just built what users wanted. There's so many groundbreaking products that were built not because users wanted them, but someone looked beyond that. Assumptions are best guesses on what is currently known. So even if you really work with your users, chances are you're going to get plus or minus 10% what they currently have because they don't think that far ahead, right? The old Henry Ford, insert Henry Ford quote about, if I asked the people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. No, at the time, to think beyond that was just too much. Now, assumptions aren't bad. They're critical to start with, but they're lethal if they're wrong and you keep building on them. You know, that cycle I showed earlier that spun outward, that is about assumptions in the beginning that became more and more valid as the cycle expanded. There was more and more evidence. So that's the power of validating assumptions as you go along. So actual example, I think Sean, this is the same client, I think. We looked at a client about a year ago and we looked through the JIRA and into what they were building. And this one epic, they were putting a tremendous amount of resources in. And I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to point out that this one epic had 4 major assumptions. They had no evidence were true, right? So they basically were pinning all of their hopes that they were right on 4 major assumptions, and they would go ahead and build it. And this just shows two stories here. This is all we could fit on the slide. There were dozens of stories, a number of tasks, and the amount of man hours behind this, and it was all assumption based. It's a very dangerous place to be. So these assumptions need to be tested gradually, but progressively more granularly. You need to identify them, which I'm going to talk about right now in a minute, and then we're going to go further with that. But the goal of the product team needs to be less about delivering a solution and more about reducing risk and continually validating assumptions quickly so you don't build upon a bad idea and drive a lot of resources into something that's not going to work. That's why 80% of features are seldom, rarely, or never used, because they were usually based on assumptions that there's lack of alignment on what the user needed, what the outcomes needed to be, and there were a lot of assumptions on how to make something happen. So understanding assumptions, there's really 3 kinds, there's actually 4, but there's 3 major types of assumptions. There's desirability, right? Is the problem pervasive? Do people want this? Is there, the way I like to think about it is the problem we're solving a big problem? Is it a headache? Is it a migraine, right? There's degrees of how much desire is there for users to spend time to have this problem solved. There's viability, is there value if we build a solution? Should we do this? And then there's feasibility. Is it feasible, right? Is this something we want to do? It's important to note that there's an innate hierarchy to these. If it's not desirable, it doesn't matter if it's viable. If it's not viable, it doesn't matter if it's feasible. So really you need to start with desirability, then move to viability, and then to feasibility. So the problem assumption, right? That's the desirability problem. That's the desirability assumption. The problem, what's the problem our customers want to solve? Can our customers solve this problem today? How? the outcome our customer wants achieved is, right? There's that word outcome. It's going to see that a lot. Viability, our acquisition strategy for obtaining customers is, right? These are things that can be tested early, at least directionally. You can mitigate some of the risk early. How are we going to generate revenue? And we're going to get into this even more to the next degree down of how to actually identify these assumptions. Here's an actual example. Dropbox went through this. You know, back in 2008 or whatever year it was they came out, they really looked at this in a hard way and said, you know, desirability. First of all, do people have multiple devices? You know, and if they do they want to access the same files across those devices? And the viability, you know, people will download Dropbox on multiple devices. Big assumption, particularly back then. Another one, people will trust the service with important data. Huge assumption. And then one of the bigger ones, will they understand how it works? I mean, at the time, the concept of the cloud wasn't a big thing. And then after they got through, checked all those boxes, then they started working on the feasibility part. Most companies start at the right and work to the left. Very expensive and ineffective way to do this. It's kind of that first value stream diagram I showed. We circled the benefit and worked our way back to the idea. That's this in reverse. So how do you identify assumptions? What we do, this is a take, I'm sure a lot of you know the business model canvas. This is a take on the business model canvas. We work with teams, we get them together, and we're doing this remotely now, which is really tricky, but it's working. And we go through each one of these categories and we push them hard on what's the area. Say, first one, customer segments. What are the assumptions we're making about the customer? How much evidence do we have that that's true? What happens if we're wrong, right? And we go through, and it's interesting, you start to see these conversations slow at the beginning, and then they start to steamroll as people start to understand that all of these things they've been thinking, they've been taking for granted, are just assumptions they really have no evidence for. And what's really powerful after we go through this, we try to end on it, come back the next day, start again, but we start with this, and it's amazing how many more assumptions people identified thinking about it later that night. But it's a powerful way to identify what assumptions are being made. Once we have that, we end up with, this is covered with all different colored sticky notes. We then go through an assumption mapping process, right? Which looks at, we take every one of those stickies and we map it to this grid. Importance, high or low. Uncertainty, high or low. And it's this upper right section here. Our highest level of uncertainty, our highest level of importance. That's the key. That's where your chances are the gotcha exists. The thing that's not going to work out. That's where they exist. I think someone had asked about prioritization, backlog prioritization. And you hear it all the time. You prioritize your most important things first. Well, here's what I'll say to that. If it's important, it's usually an assumption you're making. How about prioritize by your highest risk items first and work to validate or invalidate them and drive them out of that top quadrant, right? So if you start up there and you drive things, an assumption, you validate it, and you decide it is actually important like we thought it was, it goes to the left. You've lowered the uncertainty, but you've kept it at the level of high importance. Or maybe you just found that it's actually not that important, and so you drive it to the lower left. The lower right is an interesting one because what tends to end up there, if it's done right, are potential other revenue streams that you're not counting on in the beginning, but they might pan out later, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty and it's not that important, but it's worth having up there. This is another really powerful exercise because coming out of it, you now have a really sense for what's your biggest risk. We just did this the other day where there's like 20 or so assumptions in that upper right. And they broke down into 5 clusters. We clustered them into, right now, how do we go about validating and invalidating these? And that's where MVPs come in. I had mentioned Hendrik Nyberg earlier, and this is, I mean, I think most people have seen this. But I just want to level set. So if you'll bear with me, the idea of this diagram is that the top row, it's solution based. We're building a solution. The user wants a car. He's not going to be happy till he gets a car. So first we build a wheel, then we connect it with an axle, and then we add a chassis, and then we get a car. The problem is there's no value, and we've learned nothing until the solution is complete. The other take that Nyberg drew is really a different take, which is, all right, we're not going to focus on building a solution. We're going to focus on solving a problem. The problem is, or the underlying need of the user is, he wants to get from point A to point B, right? So how do we solve that in the fastest way possible, right? So yeah, skateboard would do that. Is going to be happy? Probably not. But at least we've given them a way to get from point A to point B, and we've learned something. Next step, yeah, we learn a little more. At each step, we get better. And eventually, we get to the point where the problem is solved. But if you look at the difference in the picture on the car on the right, lower right and upper right, they're actually not the same. It's often not noticed because what happened is there was a lot learned during the process across the bottom, and the user liked, in this instance, having having the air blow through their hair as they got from point A to point B. So that's really the power it's illustrated by this diagram, is focusing on the underlying need and looking to build fix that problem, solve that problem in a shortest, easiest way possible. So there are many different, I just pulled two from some popular pundits on how they define MVP. And there's many others, Marty Kagan and Trace Torres. They can get a lot of others out there. But really what they tend to break down to is deliver customer value with the least amount of effort and the ability to learn along the way. The way we really coach it, we look at it from this perspective, right? Effort, high versus low, value, low versus high. It's that lower right. That's an MVP, right? Lowest amount of effort, highest amount of value. The problem is that, as we've talked about, value is an assumption, right? We made a lot of assumptions along the way. Value often is one of them. And that's what those previous definitions don't really address. That's why we coach MVEs, or minimum viable experiments. And similar to an MVP, it's high versus low effort. You want low effort, but instead of value, you're producing learning. So translating it back to Nyberg's diagram we were just looking at, an MVP is the skateboard. An MVE might be the thickness of the wheels to make it steer better, right? That's an MVE. So a series of MVEs will then define an MVP and take the uncertainty around value out of the equation if you do it right. So that's a really powerful way to think about of thinking about MVPs and MVPEs in the context of how do they validate. So at what point, this is really about when do you know, okay, our MVP is ready for market. This is just a quick checklist, right? It delivers incremental value in the context of the outcome you're trying to drive, right? It's really important that it drives the outcome. It solves the problem. That's the key. Everyone's agreed upon the outcome, knowing well that it's probably just incremental, but it does contribute to the overall. It has some kind of lagging indicator measurement. Now, the lagging indicator is it's actually truly producing the outcome. It has some kind of clear leading indicator, right? Usage, things that are easy to tell that actually it is being used to the degree it needs to be. And obviously you have a channel to test. If you have no channel for it, that's obviously an issue. But it doesn't have to be a full-blown release of any kind. One of the things that we did, it was a series of MVEs. In healthcare, it's tough because products, a lot of the products I've worked on in the past exist within an EMR system or EHR system, whichever you want to call it. And what happens is it's hard to get a product in there, test it in a real world scenario. It's also a very expensive way to do that. We ended up going to hospitals that were partners of ours, and they agreed to let us set up a table in the cafeteria, and we just had paper prototypes. And we first started, giving doctors a $25 gift card to Amazon if they would give us paper prototypes. And over time, the fidelity increased, and we went to some more prototype samples. But we got great feedback at low cost, at rapid turnaround. What was interesting is one time I forgot to bring the Amazon gift cards. It didn't matter. We realized that people didn't care. They just wanted to, they saw a product that would help them do a better job, and they were happy to give feedback. So again, that channel doesn't have to be as complicated as a lot of people make it. So MVPs and MVEs, I was going to take this slide out, but Sean really liked it because he felt a lot of value, so I kept it in. But the idea down the right, we have desirable, viable, and feasible. On the left side, just more granular versions or granular ways to think about what you're testing, right? You could test for, awareness, appeal. Does it address a problem? Do people find it valuable? Do you think it's going to be usable? Is it purchasable? Usually an important thing. Can you deliver it? Can you deliver it multiple times? Will people use it multiple times? Reliance. Will it be reliable? Can we scale it? Can we make it sustainable? And if you think about it from an MVE standpoint in blue, what you're going to find is that in the beginning, you're going to be heavy MVEs, usually low fidelity, testing desirability. Because remember, desirability first, then viability. And if you think about MVPs, MVEs can test many different things, small things, big things, in a really quick, easy way. MVPs drive value, so they kind of span more than one of the desirable, viable, feasible spectrum. And as you go from left to right, you start to see that there's more of a shift down to feasibility as you really focus in on finalizing the problem that you're solving. So it's just a different way to think about what we just talked about. Real world use case. This is actually, I just kind of told that hospital story. This is what happened with the actual product. We did a lot of research. I know someone mentioned research up front. We did a lot of research. And that's when we started to realize that the real learning began when something was built. Paper prototype, whatever. But once we got something solid in front of people, that's when we started to really learning. But based on the research, we had a series of hypotheses. Like CDS is clinical decision support. It's information in the clinical workflow that helps a doctor make a better decision on how they're going to treat you. We realized, coming out of the research, we realized it had to be customized to the provider, to the doctor. It also needed to be customized to each patient. It needed to have society guidelines as a foundational part of it. Medicine works in a lot of algorithms. If this, then that, then this, then that. And they wanted the ability to adapt those algorithms quickly. And then the last one on the left is the CDS needs to be presented within the EHR. So those were what we had kind of looked at and came out of our research. Middle column is a series of assumptions that were not validated at the time. So that CDS customized provider will be desirable, that CDS customized to the patient will be desirable. Again, those are desirability pieces. Standard guidelines would be desirable. Placing the provider contextually into the middle of an interactive algorithm would be desirable. That would make sense, right? If we already know it's a 65-year-old man with heart condition, we can skip the beginning of the algorithm, whether it's a male, female, or whatever, and just jump it right down to where the doctor wanted to be. That's a safe assumption, you would think. We thought that the user would only need to see the parts of the algorithm that were relevant to that particular patient. That requirements, we didn't have any requirements regarding how we help draft a note, and there was little value in this type of CDS outside of the EHR system. Those were the assumptions we had. In the old days, we would have just written a spec against those and thrown it over the fence and had it built. In the reality, in these folding table sessions with physicians, which got higher resolution and eventually became full-blown prototypes, what we found was that the customized per provider was a nice to have. They really didn't care. Very expensive thing to build, not much value. The customizing it per patient, a lot of value, but not how we envisioned it. Had we spec'd it, we would not expect it the way it turned out they wanted it. That the standard guidelines were only a starting point, but they needed to the institution needed to customize those guidelines, something that we would never have thought of. The placing the user in an algorithm specifically was a bad idea, because what they wanted to do was basically look at what happened before, how they got to that point in the algorithm, and click the box to see what would happen if they said no, not high blood pressure. So it was very different than we had thought. We thought that was a safe assumption. It was not. We had no requirements on notes, but what the few doctors pointed out is, as they click through an algorithm, we could draft their note for them, and then they could just edit it. So it became a powerful tool to help them write their notes. And we also found that there was actually value because of the one above, that there was value outside the EHR. So anyway, long-winded example, but much better product out of the gate. We did a series of MVPs and it evolved rapidly. And it became a very successful product without a lot of upfront development or speccing. Okay. I appreciate you guys bearing with me and listening. So aligned autonomy. That's the last piece, and I think we only have one slide. So I mentioned before that aligned autonomy, we really lifted from Spotify. Now, it's important to point out that when you become outcome focused, you become aligned. So outcome is a powerful way to create alignment. If everyone's on board with the outcomes, it really helps with that alignment. There are other things that need to happen to create alignment, but that's a powerful tool in creating alignment. And then there's the autonomy piece, and high versus low. The autonomy, when you're really embracing uncertainty and iterating, you're able to give teams more autonomy to make those decisions if you know that they're driving towards the outcome that you've aligned on. So these two tend to work well together when the situation is right. So if you think about it from a low autonomy, low alignment, this tends to be micromanaging in kind of in different cultures, micromanaged organization. People just told what to do and they do it. High autonomy, low alignment. A lot of startups fall into this category. It's entrepreneurial, it's high energy, entrepreneurial, chaotic. People tend to be really autonomous doing their thing, but the alignment tends to be lacking and no one's going in the right direction. Authoritative, conformist, basically that's high alignment, low autonomy. No one's allowed to do anything that they aren't told to do. Tough environment for a lot of people to work. I would be one of them. It's really basically people just who thrive in these places are people who want to be told what to do and they're good at just getting it done. And then what we're talking about here is high autonomy, high alignment. You have everyone's focused on the same outcomes. There's incentive structures and things like that, which we're not going to get into tonight, but we coach a lot of that, how to create a high alignment environment, as well as high autonomy. So the teams all are driving towards true north, but they have alignment. They have the alignment to know, so the autonomy to iterate as they learn along the way on the best path to get to true north. This is, I don't think it's the last slide, but it's one of them. So I'm going to describe this. I'm going to pause and then we can talk a little bit more. But what we talked about on the left side, outcomes over outputs, that's the first piece. That's steps 1, 2, and 3 at the bottom. Embrace uncertainty, step 4, 5, and 6. And aligned autonomy is step 7. This is how we coach this. This is how we get in an organization. We start with step 1. Step 1 is helping them identify outcomes. And one of we survey people going in on how they think if they understand the outcomes the company's after and trying to produce. We almost always, teams give the company high marks on that. Then they go through the process and we re-sample them and their marks are significantly lower because they start to realize that they really weren't focused on outcomes. They were focused on some kind of output or some kind of bastardized version of an output and an outcome. So identifying outcomes and building consensus, that's step 1. Step 2 leading through outcomes. And I'm actually going to talk about that in a minute. Step 3 is identifying the lagging indicators. How do we know that we're producing the outcomes that matter the most? That is really the core of the outcomes over outputs. Embracing uncertainty, we actually went through a lot of this in detail, right? How do you identify the risks? That's the business model canvas, the assumption canvas, and then assumption mapping. We've identified our risks. Now we've figured out what are our riskiest assumptions. Then we go through a validation process. That's MVPs, MVEs, prototypes, whatever it takes so that we can get with minimal effort, highest amount of learning. Based on that, do we have clear leading indicators to know that we're on track? So we have fast feedback so we can make rapid decisions to move forward. And then sharpen the saw. If you're a Stephen Covey 7 Habits fan, yes, I stole that from his 7th habit. It's a great way to think about. 7 is about synergizing 1 through 6 into one fluid thing. So down the right side, or up the right side, I should say, is really tools and kind of consultant lingo on what we have to do, what we have to focus on to drive this up through operational maturity. So I threw a lot at you, and I wanted to quickly talk about, this is great, but what can I do tomorrow to start on the pathway towards something like this, which I want to do, but I might pause for a minute to see if there's any questions. So back to this cycle, I just shortened the labels. One of the things to start thinking about doing is how to create this cycle and start it turning early. That's a question we get a lot. So if you think about it this way, right? So if you schedule regular interactions, if a product owner, product manager, whoever's role it is in the organization, schedules regular interactions with customers that the team must sit through, there's going to be much more of a focus on solving a problem, not building a solution, because they're going to get instant, continual feedback on what they're building and is it moving closer to what the user wants, what's going to solve the problem. Now, those interactions need to be problem specific. They need to be focused on with an understanding of what are the problems we're trying to solve, what outcomes is the user looking for, and are we moving towards producing those outcomes? That will create a continuous flow of insights into the team, which will then continually influence what is built. So that's kind of step 1, to schedule those regular interactions. If you start from the learning side, if you require learning readouts, now this is important. If you're on a 2-week sprint, during sprint reviews, a lot of times, show me what you built, right? Let's see what we built. What if the first question is, tell me what you learned? I know you built something. Before we get to it, what did you learn? What were we trying to learn? What's the outcome we're trying to produce? And what do we learn towards that outcome? That's going to drive a focus on learning throughout the build process. It really works too. And then it's going to create learning-driven measurement through it. So it's really a powerful way to start thinking about it. Those Scrum events, particularly reviews, sprint reviews and sprint planning, are really powerful ways to help drive this, substantiate and drive this cycle. In the build piece, and I've actually done this when I was in industry as a head of product at a healthcare company. What I would do, we had a lot of Tableau measurement dashboards in our products we're doing. When we wanted to create an outcome in the market, first question I asked is, what would the dashboard look like if we're successful? Let's mock it up. And we did that. And then that became an anchor. That became a beacon on the horizon that people could look towards. It shifted the focus away from building a solution and towards solving the problem, because that was usage-based, a lot of those Tableau things. So that was a powerful way. So that it drove measurement focus throughout from build into the measurement side. And then it drove what we're going to build next through the process. So it really is a step in each one of these blades of the cycle that will help you drive this cycle. So it's schedule regular interactions, require learning readouts, and build mock measurements before building. So those are some things to think about. And what I'll close with, and you guys have been great, is this again. At the beginning, it said I'm really obsessed with, building, helping people build the right things. I was a product manager for a long time, thinking I knew what to build, and I had a lot of teams spend a lot of resources and time on things that should not have ever been built. Learned a lot since then, and this is kind of a lot of the outcoming of a tremendous amount of research and working with people like Sean and working with multiple clients to figure out what's the best way to do it. And this is where we are. It's evolving. We're inspecting and adapting continually. And appreciate any feedback any of you have. And Sean, did you want to do another Menti poll? While he does that, we can take questions.
Yeah, I think to people still with us. Sorry, getting a little feedback. If you can visit Menti and enter that code, just some final questions just on your organizations and how you're approaching product management. So I think we can kind of share those results in a minute. I don't know if we wanted to open up the questions, Dan.
Yes, absolutely. If people, you type in, you can punch in and ask, or
can we unmute to ask questions?
yes, unmute and ask questions if you want.
Okay, I have a question. I'm kind of new to this space of Agile, but I've been taking some courses and doing some online learning. And just out of my experience, one question that I've always had recently, and I don't hear too much about it, is if you can speak on the importance of CQ in this whole process.
I'm sorry, the importance of what?
CQ.
C.
Culture. Yeah, cultural intelligence. I've heard sometimes about the importance of EQ in the process, in working with teams and, working on projects. But I haven't heard much I heard a little bit about it sometimes, but yeah, the importance of that.
Did you say emotional intelligence or
EQ, cultural intelligence.
cultural intelligence?
Yes. And working with different groups, different people, especially because we're working virtually now.
Yep.
And, we're working maybe more international. So I just haven't heard a lot on it. So I just wondered if you had something to say about it.
Yes, it's a great question. The three key things we just talked about are cultural. They're outcomes, focusing on outcomes over outputs. There's embracing uncertainty. There's aligned autonomy. Those are really cultural things that need to be embedded within the culture. There's things within the team themselves, and by association, the individuals in this team, which are also really powerful, right? Continuously learning is one of them. How do you continuously learn? Problem obsessed, and this gets into the solution versus a problem. One of the things that makes a really good engineer is a lot of times their ability to build a solution. So it's a little counterintuitive to pull them back and say, no, it's about solving a problem, right? Someone gets an idea on how to do it, and they're already thinking, I can write a code that does this, this, and this. I'm going to start doing that, and it's easy to lose sight of the fact that it's really, is it solving the problem? So when you think about it, there's like a matrix of these things that we just talked about, the three things that are cultural, they're organizational, they need to be embedded in the culture, and that's hard to do. We have a group within Slalom called OE, or Organizational Effectiveness, and we work with them to help embed these things into the organization. And then there's the coaching at the team level, which is things like how to be more problem obsessed, how to be continuously learning. And the third one on the teams is how they strive for shared understandings. So it's those three things at the team level. And that's the kind of the balance that needs to be struck between the three cultural, or the three organizational, and the three team attributes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understood what you're saying. You really didn't answer my question, but that's okay.
Well, ask it. I'm not sure that I understand it then. So a CQ is.
Well, it's like when you're working with different people in different groups. Oftentimes, it seems to be left out that you're working with or learning different cultures of people, and just how important that is. To working together and progress. It's just something that seems to, again, a whole lot seems to be left out, but it's so important, and practical in the real world.
I was thinking when you said cultural, I was thinking the culture of the organization. You're talking about different cultures around the world, or different cultures, different populations.
Yeah, correct? That's what CQ, cultural intelligence, is all about.
Okay. Yeah, it's something that's it's certainly new at Slalom. It's something that we're actually doing a lot of work on right now. We work with a lot of worldwide organizations, a lot of development teams in other time zones. So it's more at this moment of a time zone issue. But I understand there's a lot more there that we need to understand.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? You can also share the results of our poll.
Oh, that'd be great.
All right. Take control here. Interesting. Things here.
So maybe just a quick question. When Slalom's working with some companies, are you kind of coming in and just kind of demonstrating the best way to work? Are you doing some trainings in-house and trying to get people to embrace a different way of working?
We do. It's what we found is we do some training, but it tends to be better when we train and coach in combination. We tend to end up, it depends, we tend to end up being there a while. We hold a series of workshops, but then we work hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, to embed these things from the ground up within teams. And then we work from the top down with the leadership to kind of embed more of those organizational impacts. Because when you start to think about focusing on outcomes, there's a different way to incent people to do that. Most, particularly IT people, are incented on delivery. Did we deliver X, Y, or Z? That's our incentive on. Not did we produce the outcomes that were expected in the marketplace. So there's a lot of shifting that needs to happen here. So we adapt how we do this, but the most successful tends to be that we come in, we do some workshops, and then we work hand in hand. Sometimes it's 6 weeks. Sometimes we were at one place for over a year. It depends on the organization, and it depends on a lot of other factors. But what it tends to be is a lot of companies realizing that they've gone through some kind of agile transformation, and they did improve their throughput, their velocity. They can now build things faster. But what that highlighted is they're actually not building the right things. And that's where a lot of times we're pulled in to then help with that.
And I want to add to that too, when you start to apply this with individual teams or squads, they quickly find out this is probably a heavier lift on the product management roles than they might have had previously. So sometimes there's an organizational alignment that needs to happen around maybe a product manager isn't stretched across 3 products anymore, but is focused in on this one product through a certain period of time to kind of get in better shape. So there's a lot here, but I think once people get their hands on and start doing some of those practical exercises that Dan walked us through, like the assumption identification and mapping exercise, they have a lot of aha moments. Sometimes we'll take them through those in a retro kind of sense, and they'll see maybe what they missed in a previous release. So that's kind of where we come in on the practical side.
And we've gone as far as sitting through client interviews, because we're shifting from outputs to outcomes. So a client interview or a customer interview becomes less about what do you want and more about getting to that underlying need. And you can't ask them what their underlying need is. There are different techniques to getting to that. So that takes more of a level of coaching on the spot at times. Other times it's more guidance going into meetings. So Sean, how's it look here?
So, interesting. These are actually lower scores than we normally see. I think the key takeaway on this is we run similar questionnaires with our clients as we begin some of these workshops and coaching phases, and we tend to see them overrate where they are in some of these areas. And by the end of the engagement, they actually are better informed, but give themselves lower scores just because they understand better what's involved here. But it seems like the crowd on the phone has a pretty good handle as to where they're at. Stakeholders having you and your stakeholders regularly measuring leading and lagging indicators to define success is the lowest score here, which I think is something we see very often in terms of people looking at measurement first and building into the process. Looks like the best score we had was effectively managing priorities and balancing what users are asking for versus what users need. So that's encouraging. But yeah, kind of 2s across the board here.
Interesting. You're right. I think it's important. What you said is in the beginning, clients tend to overrate themselves. Then they go through it, and the numbers are more in line like this afterward. So we're at 7:30. Are there any other questions or?
Dan,
yes.
I'm looking at the numbers and kind of want to make an observation question. And this is me noticing when I was answering the questions, a lot of this is getting feedback and actually talking to the people who are going to use, your product or your solution. Does this indicate kind of a lack of user testing, or even just talking to the people who are going to be using it, saying, hey, does this work? Kind of across the board, because that's what I'm seeing, but I want to make sure I'm not seeing the wrong side of it.
When you say this is indicating, are you looking at these numbers right here, or are you looking like the fact that about 80% of what's built isn't used?
These numbers right here.
It could be. I know that the thing that we find mostly is that when you're talking to users and it tends to be it sometimes is a dialogue, but it's not usually a dialogue based on the right topic. It usually is based on what we think. The user tends to talk about functionality, right? Or I want this, I want that. It's harder to get to the underlying need, which is the power of this that makes this go. Continuous discovery that's designed to figure out what's that underlying need, what's the outcome, what's the real reason they're using the product, not to use the product. And I think that's the key here. it might be that these numbers are lower because, let's put it this way, if we took this survey before we just spoke, I think the numbers would be a lot higher. I think it's, when we talk to people about this, it tends to re-level set, and maybe people understand that, yeah, maybe we aren't building the right things. Maybe we are making a lot of assumptions, but when we do try to understand what's going on out there, maybe we're not actually finding out the right things. So there might be that coming through here in these numbers.
I would say a lot of the clients we work with, it very much is they engage with clients all the time, but maybe they only engage with certain high value clients and they get dictated requirements and they just pass those down the chain, right? Or they have focus groups, but they have a session that's 50 people and you're sitting there asking for feedback and nobody's raising their hand or giving you the right answer, right? So a lot of the coaching and time we have to spend is how do we get product management to reorient how they get feedback, reorient how they're asking questions so they are outcome driven to the client and they get the client to open up a little bit more about what they're after versus just make sure I can import in this format and make sure the button is red and I'll renew my subscription.
And how do you build MVEs or MVPs to get something in front of them rapidly? Usually MVEs in the early going to really understand. To get to kind of that idea that real learning doesn't begin until something is built, something tangible is put in front of them. Did we answer your question?
Yeah, mostly. And again, in my past experience in the user experience world of just actually talking to the people instead of using your own assumptions, like, I know you want this, you put it out there and again, it doesn't get used. So I was just looking at these and they seem just very user oriented. And I was just wondering if that was the theme of not really, where's the feedback, not really capturing the right feedback and utilizing it the way we should be to, push these numbers up and make the better product. So yeah. You guys answered it.
All right.
So any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys. I'm not sure if I'm sharing. I guess I'm not sharing right now, but Sean and I are on LinkedIn. We had shown our email addresses earlier, but I'm dan.gallagher@slalom.com. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, thoughts, afterthoughts, or message me on LinkedIn. And thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan and Sean. So next month we have on November the 17th, we've got Lego Play, How Purposeful Play Leads to Innovation, with Jill Callanan and Michelle Broadbent. So we hope to see you all there. Barbara, do you have anything else to add about November's presentation?
Nope, that's it. I hope you all can join. There is a prerequisite that you have some Legos, or you can just kind of observe. So some of us will be kind of playing along with Legos. This is typically something that you do interactively, in a room, but they've figured it out virtually. So it's pretty fun. So I hope you can join us next month. So please look for the invite either on our LinkedIn page or Meetup. And we hope to see you next month.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you
Thanks
very
for
much
having
for
us.
joining.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Sean.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.